Months after a bullied alien warehouse worker vanished, an Imperial guardian walked into the inspection hall, wearing marks no ordinary being survives to earn. Everyone thought the Empire had come to judge their world, but the guardian was there for one silent human who once did too little. Too late. Comment your city? Subscribe to stand with this story? And now, the story begins. Daniel Cole learned early that survival meant keeping your head down. At 31, he had the kind of body that came from lifting cargo crates, not gym memberships. His brown hair stuck to his forehead most days in Houston's humid air, and the wrench tattoo on his forearm had faded from years of sweat and sun. He worked maintenance at the Houston Interstellar Terminal, the kind of job where you fixed things quietly and disappeared before anyone remembered to thank you. The terminal itself sprawled across what used to be old industrial districts, now transformed into Earth's main interface port. Low buildings stretched toward launch platforms where ships from a dozen species came and went daily. Humans and aliens moved through the corridors side by side, though not always comfortably. Earth was still new to this, still being evaluated by the Kethar Empire, the sprawling union of species that controlled trade routes and mediated disputes across this arm of the galaxy. Daniel had dropped out of engineering school 3 years ago when his father got sick. Someone had to pay for the medications, and that someone turned out to be him. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself a lot of things. Warehouse 7 smelled like ozone and recycled air. The inventory system beeped constantly, tracking shipments from worlds Daniel couldn't pronounce. He was calibrating a cargo scanner when he noticed her for the first time. She was Vareth, one of the species that looked almost human if you didn't pay attention. But Daniel paid attention. Her skin had that faint bluish undertone that caught certain lights. Her eyes were large and dark violet, the kind that seemed to hold entire conversations she never spoke aloud. Her black hair was pulled back tight, like she was trying to take up less space than she already did. She wore the standard inventory assistant uniform, and she moved through the warehouse like she was apologizing for existing. Daniel watched her struggle with a handheld scanner for almost 5 minutes before walking over. He didn't say anything, just showed her the reset sequence with his own device, then pointed to the problem crate. She looked up at him with those violet eyes, surprised, and something in his chest did an uncomfortable flip. She whispered something that might have been thank you in her own language, then added in accented English, barely audible over the warehouse noise. Thank you. He nodded and walked away before it could get awkward. That was Daniel's specialty, helping without being seen. Over the next few weeks, he learned her name from the staff roster. Jira Vareth. She worked double shifts, took the worst time slots, and never once complained about anything. Other workers talked past her. Supervisor Grant talked down to her. She absorbed it all with her head slightly bowed. Daniel found himself adjusting his brakes to match hers. Not that he ever sat at the same table. He just liked knowing someone else was there. Someone else who understood what it meant to be invisible. Then came the day everything cracked open. Jira was logging a shipment code when her fingers slipped. 3 crates got tagged for the wrong sector. It was the kind of mistake that happened 20 times a day, the kind the system was built to catch and correct. But Grant was having a bad day, and Grant liked having targets. Hey! Hey you! Space case. Jira froze. Daniel was 2 aisles over, close enough to hear everything. I knew this whole thing about mixing space people in here was going to be a problem. You understand what I'm saying, or do you just blink at me? Grant mimicked her slow blink, the way her large eyes moved. Someone laughed. Another worker glanced over, then looked away fast. Jira lowered her head further, her shoulders curling inward like she could fold herself into nothing. Daniel's hands tightened on the datapad he was holding. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, to say something, to do literally anything except stand there. But his brain was louder. If you confront the supervisor, you get fired. And then what? Who pays for your father's medication? Who keeps the lights on? So Daniel did what he always did. He stayed quiet. He waited until Grant walked away, muttering about incompetent aliens. He waited until the other workers dispersed. Then he walked over to the terminal and started fixing the routing errors himself. He changed the logs, listed it as a communication glitch, a system error. He made sure none of it would trace back to her employment record. Zira stood there watching him work, her violet eyes wet but not crying. When he finished, she spoke so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you, Daniel." He wanted to say something. Wanted to tell her Grant was an asshole, that she didn't deserve that someone should have spoken up. Instead, he just nodded and walked away. But what stayed with him wasn't her gratitude. It was the shame. It sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold, and he knew it wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. The weeks that followed felt like watching someone drown in slow motion. Grant found new ways to make Zira's life difficult. Suddenly, every inventory discrepancy needed her personal signature. Every shipping delay required her written explanation. The tasks weren't impossible, just designed to remind her that she was being watched, judged, found wanting. Daniel watched her shrink a little more each day. He started doing small things, leaving instruction sheets translated into Vereth script near her workstation, quietly redistributing some of her impossible task load when the system allowed it, covering small errors before they could become ammunition. But he never said anything directly, never confronted Grant, never made a scene. His father called one evening while Daniel was eating reheated synth protein at his apartment. The medication costs had gone up again. They always went up. His father apologized, the way he always did, his voice weak and guilty over the phone. Daniel said it was fine, the way he always did. It wasn't fine. He picked up an extra shift the next day, showed up early, stayed late, did the math in his head over and over. Rent, medications, food, utilities. The numbers never quite added up to enough. The terminal had wall screens everywhere showing local news feeds. Usually Daniel ignored them, but lately one face kept appearing. Senator Howard Pike, a local politician who had built his entire platform on Earth-first rhetoric. "Humans are being exploited," Pike said during one broadcast, his face earnest and concerned. "We opened our planet to the Kethar Empire. And what did we get? We became a truck stop, a refueling station. Our people work the worst jobs while aliens get preferential treatment." The camera cut to footage of an alien worker making a mistake. Cargo falling, human supervisors looking frustrated. Daniel wondered if Grant had sold that footage to Pike's campaign. "They're sending us their unqualified, their problems," Pike continued. "And Earth is expected to just absorb it all with a smile." A few workers started nodding along during break times. The narrative was simple, appealing. Someone else to blame for why life was hard. Daniel noticed Zira eating lunch alone more often. The break room would go quiet when she entered. Not hostile exactly, just absent. Like she was a space people walked around. One day he sat 3 tables away from her, close enough that it might mean something, far enough that it was deniable. She glanced up, surprised, then looked back down at her food. It wasn't much, but it was something. The worst day came during an afternoon shift. A shipment of medical supplies arrived, mislabeled. Protocol required verification before accepting it. Zira was the one who caught the error, flagging it for review before it went into the system. Grant saw the hold notice and came over fast. "What's the problem now?" She explained quietly about the labeling discrepancy. Her English was actually quite good, just accented, careful. She showed him the documentation, the protocol requirements. "So you're telling me you're holding up an entire medical shipment because the font is wrong?" "It's not the font," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The batch numbers don't match the manifest. If these get distributed without verification, it could be dangerous." Grant leaned in close. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand it. Every time you flag something, every time you slow down the process, you're costing Earth money. You're costing human jobs. Maybe where you come from, that's fine. But here, we don't have the luxury of your alien caution. The medications are for children," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "The batch verification exists for a reason." Daniel was standing 15 feet away, logging container numbers. His hands stopped moving. His whole body stopped moving. Grant's voice rose. "Are you telling me how to do my job? I'm following protocol." "Protocol?" "Right. Let me explain Earth protocol to you. We get things done. We don't hide behind rules when actual people need help. I understand, but..." "Do you?" "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're more concerned with covering your own ass than with sick kids." The implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Zira's face went very still. Daniel could feel the moment crystallizing, could feel the exact shape of the choice in front of him. He could speak up, point out that Zira was literally trying to protect sick children, point out that Grant was the one playing politics with people's lives, or he could keep his head down, keep his job, keep his father's medication flowing. The silence stretched out. Daniel looked down at his datapad and kept typing. Grant approved the override himself, logging it under his own authority. The shipment moved forward. Zira stood there for a long moment, then walked back to her station. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept running the math differently, trying to find a version where speaking up didn't equal disaster. There wasn't one. The numbers were too tight, the margins too thin, but he also kept seeing her face, the way she'd tried to do the right thing and gotten punished for it. At 3 in the morning, he pulled up the terminal systems remotely and checked the shipment logs. The medical supplies had gone through. The batch numbers were fine. Zira had been wrong about the error. Except she hadn't been wrong. Someone had corrected the manifest retroactively. Probably Grant, covering his tracks. Daniel sat in the dark, staring at the screen, hating himself a little more. The next day, Zira barely looked at anyone. She moved through her shifts like a ghost, there but not there, and Daniel kept his head down, helping in the ways that didn't cost him anything. It wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. But what else could he do? 3 weeks passed like slow erosion. Daniel fell into a pattern he told himself was helping. He'd arrive early to recalibrate any equipment Zira would be using. He'd leave translated duty rosters where she'd find them. When the schedule put her on impossible back-to-back shifts, he'd quietly swap with other workers, spreading the burden. She noticed. He could tell by the way she'd glance toward him sometimes, those violet eyes holding questions she never asked aloud. Once, she caught him adjusting a malfunctioning inventory scanner before her shift. She stopped in the doorway, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. "You don't have to," she said softly. "I know." She nodded slowly, then added something in her own language. It sounded like a blessing, or maybe an apology. He didn't ask which. The terminal break room had a wall of windows overlooking the launch platforms. Daniel started taking his lunch there, sitting in the corner where the light came in best. After a few days, Zira started sitting there too, 2 tables away, close enough that it felt deliberate. They didn't talk, but the silence felt less lonely. One day she was reading something on a datapad, her expression distant and sad. Daniel recognized that look. It was the same one he wore when thinking about things he couldn't fix. "Home?" he asked, surprising himself. She looked up, startled, then nodded. "It's complicated. Usually is." She smiled, barely. "My family's name was tied to accusations we couldn't answer. We weren't criminals, but explaining that would have required people to listen. It was easier for everyone if we just stayed quiet. So you learned to be invisible, something like that." Her fingers traced the edge of her datapad. "I thought coming to Earth would be different. Somewhere new where the past didn't follow me." "Did it work? What do you think?" He had no answer for that. She went back to her reading, and he went back to his food, but something had shifted. They weren't just 2 people occupying space anymore. They were 2 people who understood what it meant to carry weight no one else could see. The harassment didn't stop. Grant seemed to take Zira's quiet endurance as permission to escalate. He scheduled her for inventory checks during meal breaks. He assigned her the loading dock sections where the temperature controls malfunctioned most. He'd ask her questions in staff meetings, then talk over her when she tried to answer. Other workers followed his lead, or at least didn't object. It became normalized, the casual cruelty of it. Daniel kept helping in his invisible ways, kept fixing problems before they could be blamed on her, kept carrying pieces of her burden that no one else acknowledged existed. But he also kept quiet when it mattered most. One evening, Daniel's father called while he was walking back to the transit station. The conversation was brief. The new medication was working, but it made him nauseous. The doctor said that was normal. Everything was always normal until it wasn't. "I'm sorry you have to work so hard," his father said. "It's fine, Dad. You should be finishing your degree. Building something. I am building something." He wasn't sure either of them believed it. The next day, Zero wasn't at her station. Daniel noticed immediately, the way you notice when a familiar ache suddenly stops. He checked the schedule. She was supposed to be on shift. By midday, other workers started commenting. Grant looked annoyed, muttering about unreliable workers. Daniel felt ice forming in his stomach. At the end of the shift, he saw it. A notice on the staff board, printed in standard administrative font. Cold and impersonal. Contract for Ziravarath, Inventory Associate, has been rescinded effective immediately. Personnel has been transferred to Imperial jurisdiction per Kethar Employment Protocols, Section 47.9. That was it. No explanation. No forwarding information. Just gone. Daniel stood staring at the notice for a long time. Workers flowed around him, some glancing at the board, most not caring. One guy laughed, guessed she couldn't handle the work. Someone else shrugged. Probably got deported. They do that sometimes when workers don't make quota. Daniel's hands formed fists in his pockets. He walked to the HR office and waited 40 minutes to talk to someone. The administrator, a tired-looking woman named Chen, barely looked up from her terminal. Ziravarath. "What happened to her?" "Transferred to Imperial jurisdiction. It's there in the notice." "What does that mean?" Chen sighed. "Could mean a lot of things. Deportation, reassignment, legal review. The Empire has its own processes for non-Terran citizens. It's not really our business once they take custody." "Custody? Was she arrested?" "I don't have those details. The notice came through automated channels. So she's just gone. And no one knows where or why." Chen finally looked at him, her expression not unkind but definitely exhausted. "Mr. Cole, these things happen. Contract workers come and go. The Empire has protocols we don't control. I'm sorry, but there's nothing more I can tell you." He walked out, feeling hollowed out. That night, he pulled up everything he could find about Imperial jurisdiction transfers. Most of it was bureaucratic jargon. Some sources suggested it meant deportation. Others said it was standard protocol for worker reassignment. A few mentioned legal proceedings for contract violations. None of it felt right. He kept seeing her face. The way she'd tried to do the right thing about those medical supplies. The way she'd endured everything thrown at her without fighting back. The way she'd said thank you in that barely audible voice. And he kept seeing himself, standing there, quiet. The warehouse felt emptier after that. Daniel went through his shifts mechanically, the guilt sitting heavier each day. He started doing for other alien workers what he'd done for her. Explaining systems, covering mistakes, pushing back gently when someone got blamed unfairly. But it didn't help. Nothing helped. Because he'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes staying silent doesn't protect anyone. Sometimes it just means you're part of the problem. And by the time you realize it, the person you failed is already gone. 6 months later, Daniel Cole was a different kind of tired. The warehouse looked the same. The work was the same, but something in him had fundamentally shifted, like a bone that healed wrong and now ached in weather changes. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in the way people romanticize obsession. It was more like a wound that wouldn't close. Every time he saw an alien worker struggling with equipment, every time Grant's voice rose in that particular way, Every time someone lowered their head and accepted cruelty as normal, Daniel saw Zira, and he saw himself, standing there, quiet. So he stopped being quiet. It started small. When a Thraxian dockworker got blamed for a loading delay that wasn't their fault, Daniel pulled up the automated logs and showed them to the shift supervisor. When a Kelvara maintenance tech couldn't figure out the break room protocols, Daniel sat down and walked them through it, even though his lunch got cold. He learned basic phrases in 4 different languages. He studied the cultural databases the Empire provided, learning which gestures meant respect and which ones were accidentally insulting. He started recognizing when someone was being set up to fail, and he did something about it. It cost him extra hours reviewing logs, extra effort diffusing situations. More than once, Grant looked at him with narrowed eyes, like he was calculating something. But Daniel's father's medication had stabilized at a manageable cost. The numbers finally added up. And he discovered he could live with Grant's suspicion more easily than he could live with his own silence. The terminal's logistics AI, Hera 9, was supposed to be just a scheduling and routing system. But Daniel started noticing things. Equipment would be pre-calibrated before he could get to it. Schedule conflicts would resolve themselves before he could report them. Once, he found a translated document packet exactly where an alien worker needed it, and he knew he hadn't put it there. One night, working a late inventory shift, he decided to test something. He walked up to one of Hera's interface terminals in an empty section of the warehouse and spoke to the air. "Are you watching?" The screen flickered. A text response appeared. "I am observation capable in all terminal sectors. Maintenance Technician Cole. Is there a system malfunction?" "No malfunction. I just wanted to know if you noticed things. The things that aren't in protocols." A pause. Then, "I noticed discrepancies between expected and actual behavior patterns. Is this regarding a specific incident?" Jira Vereth. 6 months ago. Her contract was terminated. Do you know what happened to her?" Another pause, longer this time. Operator Vareth was flagged by Imperial authorities through automated compliance monitoring. Her behavioral profile matched specific recruitment criteria. Recruitment? I am not authorized to provide details on Imperial personnel procedures. However, the Cathar Empire maintains programs for identifying individuals who demonstrate resilience and ethical judgment under adverse conditions. Daniel's heart started beating faster. "You're saying she wasn't deported?" "I am saying her transfer was initiated by Imperial recruitment authorities, not disciplinary procedures." He leaned against the terminal. "So she's alive, somewhere. I have no data on her current status. However, recruitment transfers typically indicate evaluation for specialized positions. And me? Have you been flagging me?" The screen went blank for 3 full seconds. Then, "You demonstrate consistent patterns of intervention on behalf of disadvantaged personnel. You adjust systems to protect workers while maintaining operational efficiency. You accept personal cost to prevent harm to others. These behaviors are notable. Are you reporting me to someone?" "I report all anomalous patterns to relevant authorities. In your case, those patterns include sustained ethical action without expectation of reward or recognition." Daniel stared at the screen, not sure if he should feel watched or validated. "Thank you," he said finally. "Clarification. I am performing assigned observational functions. Thanks are unnecessary. Still, thank you." The screen flickered once, which might have been acknowledgement or might have been nothing. 2 weeks later, the announcement came through every terminal in the facility simultaneously. Imperial inspection scheduled for Houston Interface Port, Terminal Complex 7. Cathar Guardian arriving for evaluation of Terran Associate World status. All personnel required for compliance review. Authorization level, maximum. The warehouse erupted in nervous energy. Guardian inspections almost never happened. The Cathar Empire had hundreds of associate worlds. Unless something was seriously wrong or seriously right, they left you alone. A guardian coming in person meant Earth's status was being evaluated. They could be elevated to full member status, with all the trade benefits that implied. Or they could be dropped entirely, cut off from Imperial roots and protection. Senator Pike appeared on every news feed within hours, his expression grave and excited at once. "This is what I've been warning you about. They're coming to judge us, to decide if we're good enough for their empire. Well, I say it's time we judge them." Grant went into overdrive, demanding perfection from everyone. The terminal got cleaned until it gleamed. Protocols were reviewed. Everyone got new uniforms. It felt less like preparation and more like panic. Daniel went through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere. A guardian was coming, someone with actual authority, someone who might have answers about recruitment programs and where people like Zira ended up. The night before the inspection, he stood in the empty warehouse and looked at the place where her workstation used to be. Someone else used it now, a human tech who complained about the calibration. He'd spent 6 months trying to be better. Trying to make up for the moment he stayed quiet. Tomorrow, someone would come who represented everything the Empire stood for. Power and judgment and the weight of countless worlds. Daniel wondered if they'd even notice the places where small people like him tried to make things slightly less cruel. He wondered if they'd care. In the ceiling, a camera blinked. Hera 9, watching as always, recording everything. And somewhere in the Imperial bureaucracy, reports were being filed. Patterns were being analyzed. Decisions were being made. Tomorrow, the Guardian would arrive. And nothing would ever be the same. The day arrived wrapped in Houston humidity and collective anxiety. Daniel showed up 2 hours early, not because anyone asked him to, but because sleep had been impossible. The terminal looked strange, too clean and too quiet, like a stage set waiting for actors. Welcome banners hung in 3 languages, the smell of fresh paint mixed with recycled air. Workers moved through pre-inspection routines, everyone hyper-aware of being watched. Grant stalked through the warehouse with a datapad, checking and rechecking everything, his face red with stress. "Make sure those cargo lanes are perfect. I want 0 discrepancies in the logs. If anyone screws this up, I swear to God." Daniel tuned him out and focused on his assigned tasks: equipment calibration, system verification, the boring, reliable work that kept everything running. It felt good to have something concrete to do with his hands. In the administrative wing, Senator Pike was holding court with a camera crew. "Today's inspection represents a crossroads for Earth," he announced, his voice practiced and smooth. "We'll see if the Empire truly values partnership, or if we're just being exploited for our location and resources." Someone asked if he thought the inspection would go well. Pike smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "I think the truth will come out. And I've prepared documentation showing exactly how Imperial policies have impacted Terran workers." Daniel wondered what documentation he meant, wondered if it included footage of Zira being humiliated in this very warehouse, wondered if he'd be in those videos, standing silently in the background. The official delegation was set to arrive at noon. By 11:30, everyone was assembled in the main receiving hall, a vast space normally used for cargo sorting, but now transformed with hastily installed seating and display screens. Earth representatives sat on one side. Imperial officials, mostly administrative types who'd been stationed on Earth for years, sat on the other. The general workforce filled the back sections. Daniel ended up near the middle, where he could see everything but wasn't quite part of either group. Grant stood with other supervisors, his new uniform crisp but his expression nervous. Pike sat in the front row, his face set in careful neutrality. At exactly noon, the main doors opened. The room went silent. A figure entered, backlit by the harsh Texas sun outside, and even from a distance Daniel could feel the weight of authority. They moved with perfect posture, steady and unhurried, their footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. As they came into the hall's lighting, details emerged. A dark cloak, charcoal gray with silver threading that caught the light like star charts. Beneath it, form-fitting armor of some lightweight composite material that looked both ceremonial and functional. And on their skin, visible at the neck and hands, glowing patterns. Not tattoos exactly, more like circuits of light embedded just beneath the surface, tracing elegant lines up from beneath the collar. The marks pulsed faintly, synchronized with their heartbeat. Guardian marks. The unmistakable signature of someone chosen for the Empire's highest service. The entire room stood. It happened automatically, instinctively, the kind of respect that transcended culture and species. The Guardian walked to the center of the hall, movements precise but not mechanical. They carried themselves like someone who'd learned to bear enormous weight without showing the strain. When they reached the central platform, they stopped. The hood still covered their face, casting shadows that made them seem almost ethereal. An Imperial administrator, a silver-skinned Velkari, stepped forward with a formal scroll. By authority of the Kethar Imperial Council, we present Guardian Zira Vareth, appointed to the Frontier Service, here to conduct evaluation of Terran Associate status and review compliance with Imperial employment standards. Daniel's brain stopped working. The name echoed in the huge space. Zira Vareth. Zira Vareth. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The Guardian raised both hands to their hood. Daniel's heart was hammering so hard he thought everyone must hear it. Around him people shifted, curious and confused. Grant looked pale. Pike leaned forward, calculating. The hood came back. It was her. But it wasn't her. The same face, those same violet eyes and delicate features and pale blue-tinted skin. But everything else had transformed. Her hair, previously kept tight and small, now fell loose past her shoulders in dark waves that seemed to catch light like water. The marks on her neck climbed up to her jawline, pulsing with soft luminescence. Her posture, once curled and apologetic, was now straight and centered, and her eyes, those sad, careful eyes that used to avoid contact. Now they swept across the room like searchlights, missing nothing, flinching at nothing. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner without shouting. I am Zira Vareth, Guardian of the Kethar Empire, assigned to the Frontier Service. I am here to evaluate not only systems and protocols, but the treatment of all lives under this facility's jurisdiction. I am here to observe how power is wielded and how dignity is protected. Her gaze moved across the crowd, touching on faces. When it reached Daniel, it paused for half a heartbeat, and something flickered in those violet eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Then she looked away, professional and distant. I will conduct interviews, review operational logs, and assess compliance with Imperial standards. This evaluation will determine Earth's continued status as an associate world. I expect full cooperation and complete transparency. She paused, and the silence stretched out until it felt fragile. Let us begin with truth. All of it, hidden and visible. The administrator bowed. The Earth representatives stood frozen. Pike looked like he'd just been handed a gift and wasn't sure if it was poisoned. And Daniel stood in the middle of it all, his world tilting sideways. She'd been here, in this building, working in that warehouse, being humiliated by that supervisor who was now sweating through his new uniform. She'd disappeared, vanished into Imperial jurisdiction, and she'd come back wearing marks that only the Empire's chosen carried. The quiet alien woman from Warehouse 7, the one he'd failed to defend. The one who'd thanked him anyway. She was a guardian now. She had the power of the entire Empire behind her, and she was looking at them all with eyes that remembered everything. Daniel felt something in his chest, complex and tangled. Relief that she was alive. Shame that she'd seen him at his worst. Pride that she'd become this. Fear of what she might do with that power. And underneath it all, a question he couldn't silence. Had she come back for justice or for judgment? He was terrified he might not like the answer. The proceedings moved to Conference Hall A, a space designed for diplomatic functions that Earth had built specifically to impress Imperial visitors. Curved walls, adaptive lighting, translation systems humming quietly in the background. It felt like a courtroom pretending to be a boardroom. Daniel ended up seated in the general observation section, close enough to see faces but far enough to feel invisible. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Guardian Vareth, no, just Jira in his head because his brain couldn't reconcile the titles with the memory. Stood at the central podium reviewing data on a projected display. Her movements were efficient, professional. Nothing about her demeanor suggested she remembered stacking boxes in a humid warehouse while people mocked her accent. But Daniel remembered. He remembered everything. The Earth delegation sat in careful formation. Senator Pike had positioned himself front and center, his posture suggesting helpful cooperation while his eyes calculated angles. Grant was sweating despite the temperature control, his fingers drumming against his datapad. An Imperial administrator, the same Velkari from earlier, gestured to the displays. Guardian Vareth, we have compiled 6 months of operational data, efficiency reports, and personnel records. Houston Terminal has maintained acceptable performance metrics across all standard categories. Jira nodded without looking up from her review. Acceptable performance is insufficient for this evaluation. The question is not whether systems function, but how they function and at what cost. She touched the display, and the data reorganized itself into patterns Daniel didn't recognize. I want to examine incident reports, personnel complaints, and conflict resolutions. Cross-reference them with productivity metrics and worker retention rates. The administrator looked uncertain. That level of detail may require several days to compile properly. Hera-9 can provide it immediately. Her voice was calm but absolute. The system has maintained comprehensive logs of all terminal operations, including informal interactions and behavioral patterns. A murmur ran through the room. That kind of monitoring existed but was rarely acknowledged openly. Pike saw his opening. He stood, his expression carefully concerned. Guardian Vareth, if I may. Before we dive into data, I think context is important. Earth's relationship with the Empire has been challenging. We opened our world in good faith, but we've experienced significant difficulties with Imperial labor policies. Jira turned to face him, her expression neutral. Specify these difficulties. Pike gestured to his aide, who activated another display. Footage began playing. Warehouse scenes, cargo handling, mistakes being made. The editing was professional, designed to show chaos and incompetence. What you're seeing, Pike continued, are just a few examples of the operational problems caused by placing unprepared non-Terran workers in critical positions. These individuals lack proper training, create safety hazards, and cost Earth significant resources in corrections and repairs. The footage continued. An alien worker, species Daniel didn't recognize, dropping equipment. Another struggling with control interfaces. A third causing a minor cargo spill. "We're not prejudiced," Pike said, his voice taking on that practiced earnestness. "We simply want workers who can do the job properly. But Imperial quotas force us to accept personnel who aren't ready for these positions." Jira watched the footage without visible reaction. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, which somehow felt more intense than anger. "You've documented these incidents extensively," she observed. "We believe in transparency." "Do you?" She tapped her display. Hera-9, cross-reference this footage with full incident reports including preceding context and resolution outcomes. The display flickered. New data appeared alongside the video clips. Suddenly, the dropped equipment had context. Worker on double shift, equipment malfunction not reported by previous shift. The control interface struggle included notation. System updated without worker training notification. The cargo spill showed. Emergency evacuation drill interrupted standard procedures. Worker followed protocol. Every dramatic moment Pike had shown now had explanatory data beside it. Pike's confident expression flickered. "Those details don't change the fundamental issues. They change everything," Jira said quietly. "They transform incompetence into systems failure. Interesting how your documentation omitted that information." She turned back to the main display. "I want to examine a specific case." 8 months ago, this terminal employed a Varith species worker in inventory operations. Her contract was terminated. I want to see the complete record of her employment." The room went very still. Grant made a small sound, quickly stifled. Pike's aide fumbled with the controls. A new file appeared. Employment record, Gira Varith. 127 days of service. Show me incident reports. A series of small flags appeared in the timeline. Minor errors, mostly corrected quickly, nothing serious. Show me disciplinary documentation. More flags. Verbal warnings for errors that were actually system glitches. Performance reviews that noted acceptable work but questioned cultural fit. Pike leaned forward, sensing something. "Guardian, if you're concerned about your namesake's treatment, I should point out that this worker had numerous documented issues. She was flagged multiple times for errors that affected operations." "Show the specific incidents," Gira said, "including video." The footage appeared. Daniel's stomach clenched. There she was, younger somehow even though it had only been months, her shoulders curled inward, her fingers working carefully at a terminal. Then came the mistake. The wrong shipping code. 3 containers flagged incorrectly. The camera captured what happened next. Grant approaching, his body language aggressive, his face twisted with contempt. The audio played. Every word Daniel had tried to forget came flooding back. "I knew this whole thing about mixing space people in here was going to be a problem. You understand what I'm saying? Or do you just blink at me?" The mocking imitation. The laughter from other workers. Her head bowing lower and lower. Pike's expression shifted, calculating rapidly. He'd clearly expected this to support his narrative. Instead, it looked like exactly what it was. Pure cruelty. "Guardian," Pike tried. That supervisor was under significant stress. Terran workers face enormous pressure to maintain productivity while training inexperienced Imperial assignees. Zira's voice cut through like frost. "Hera 9, show the complete sequence. Include what happened after initial incident." The footage continued, Grant walking away, other workers dispersing, the warehouse mostly empty. Then Daniel appeared on screen. Daniel, watching the footage of himself, felt surreal, disconnected. He looked tired, defeated, but he moved toward the terminal, started working, his fingers flying across the interface, correcting the routing errors, adjusting the documentation. Carefully, methodically removing any formal blame from Zira's record while still fixing the actual problem. The timestamp showed him working for 40 minutes, alone, unpaid overtime to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. "Hera 9, Zira said, her voice steady but softer. "Expand search. Show me all instances where this worker, Daniel Cole, intervened on behalf of other personnel." The display erupted with data, dozens of incidents. Daniel adjusting schedules, correcting errors before they could be blamed on vulnerable workers, translating documents, covering shifts. A pattern of quiet intervention spanning months. Pike looked at the data, then at Daniel, then back at Zira. His political instincts were scrambling. "This is," he started, then stopped, recalibrating. "This actually demonstrates exactly what I've been saying. Earth workers constantly having to compensate for Imperial policy failures." Zira finally showed emotion. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Or, she said softly, it demonstrates that some humans understand justice better than others. She turned to face the full room, her guardian marks pulsing brighter. "Hera 9, project the complete logs. Show everyone what you showed me. Every intervention, every quiet correction, every moment someone chose to help rather than harm." The displays lit up with months of data, not just Daniel. Other workers too, human and alien, helping each other in small ways, covering mistakes, sharing knowledge, protecting the vulnerable, and contrasted against that, the pattern of systematic harassment. Grant's escalating cruelty, Pike's selective documentation, a structure designed to pit Earth against the Empire by first creating suffering and then exploiting it for political gain. The evidence was overwhelming. Senator Pike's face went through several shades of pale. Grant looked like he might be sick, and Daniel sat frozen, watching his own 6 months of guilt and attempted redemption projected for everyone to see. Jira stood at the center of it all, her violet eyes reflecting the display lights, and spoke into the ringing silence. When my contract was terminated, I was not deported. I was invited. Invited to train as a guardian because Imperial monitoring systems identified something rare. Not perfection, not fearlessness, but consistent ethical action despite personal cost. She looked directly at Daniel. The human in that footage chose to help when it would have been easier not to. He protected someone he had no reason to protect. He did it quietly, without recognition, without reward. That is what the Empire looks for. That is what we train to defend. Her gaze swept to Grant, then Pike. And that is what I am here to measure. Not your systems, your souls. The room held its breath, and Daniel finally understood. She hadn't come back for judgment. She'd come back to show them what they'd failed to see all along. That the person who mattered most was the one they'd all ignored. The silence after Zyra's statement stretched like pulled wire, taut and dangerous. Grant had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. He stood rigid in his seat, knowing every eye in the room had just watched him systematically torture someone for months. Pike recovered faster, his political survival instincts kicking in. He stood, his expression shifting to careful concern. Guardian Vareth, I think we all appreciate your perspective on these matters. However, I'd like to point out that the supervisor in question was operating under significant operational pressure. Earth's resources are stretched thin, serving as an Imperial way station, and sometimes that manifests in unfortunate but understandable tensions. Zyra turned to face him fully. The marks on her neck pulsed brighter, and Daniel had the distinct impression they responded to emotional state. Senator, would you describe what you just witnessed as tension? Pike spread his hands. I would describe it as a stressed professional having an inappropriate moment. Regrettable, but not necessarily indicative of systemic issues. Zyra touched her display. The projection changed. This is Supervisor Grant's personnel file. Over the past 2 years, 14 formal complaints filed against him by non-Terran workers, all dismissed as cultural misunderstandings. 3 transfer requests from employees specifically citing hostile work environment, all denied due to operational necessity. She paused, letting the data speak. HERA 9 has also flagged 73 distinct instances where Supervisor Grant used derogatory language, intimidation tactics, or discriminatory task assignment. The pattern is documented, consistent, and escalating. Grant finally found his voice. It was shaking. That's not the context of those situations. Zyra cut him off with a look. Do you recognize your own words, Supervisor? The ones about mixing space people? About how I only blinked? Grant's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Tell me, Zyra continued, her voice deadly calm, what was the context that made mockery acceptable? What pressure justified turning a worker's appearance into entertainment for others? Grant managed. The job, the quotas. Everyone was always. She took a single step toward him. He actually flinched. I lived that mockery every day, here and before I came to Earth. I know what it feels like to be the target. To shrink yourself hoping to become small enough to avoid notice. To accept humiliation as the price of survival. Her hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. It was the first break in her professional composure, a flash of the person beneath the Guardian. The difference between an oppressor and someone trapped in a system is what they do with their power. You chose to use yours as a weapon. You chose to transform your frustrations into someone else's suffering. Grant sat down heavily, his face in his hands. Pike tried again, his voice taking on that practiced sympathy. Guardian, surely we can distinguish between individual failings and the larger structural issues at play. This man made mistakes, yes, but the pressure he was under came from Imperial policies that strain Earth's resources. Jira's laugh was short and bitter. "You're impressive, Senator. You witness systematic abuse and somehow make it about policy critique. Let me show you something else." The display changed again. This time it showed Pike himself, sitting in an office, reviewing the same warehouse footage with his media team. The audio was crystal clear. Cut it to show maximum chaos. I need the aliens looking incompetent and the humans looking overwhelmed. We're building a narrative here. His aide's voice. "What about context?" Pike on the recording shrugged. "Context is what we provide." The real Pike stood frozen, calculating how to spin this. "You knew," Jira said. "You knew the footage was misleading. You engineered it that way. You built a political platform on manufactured grievances using actual people's suffering as your construction material." Pike's expression hardened. "I was advocating for Earth's interests." "No, Senator. You were exploiting Earth's pain for personal power." "There's a difference." She turned back to the full assembly, her voice carrying to every corner. "I want to clarify something for everyone here. When my contract was terminated, it was not punishment. It was recruitment." The room stirred with confused murmurs. "The Kethar Empire maintains specialized monitoring programs on frontier worlds. We're looking for individuals who've experienced injustice firsthand. People who understand what it means to be powerless. Because those people, when given power, tend to wield it differently." She gestured to the displays showing Daniel's interventions. "Here A9 flagged 2 individuals in this facility. One was me, demonstrating resilience and ethical judgment under sustained harassment. The other was Daniel Cole, demonstrating consistent empathy and protection of others, despite personal cost." Daniel felt every eye turn toward him. His face burned. "Based on those patterns, I was invited to Imperial training. 6 months of learning laws, protocols, combat, and mediation. 6 months of transforming from someone who survived cruelty into someone who prevents it." She looked directly at Daniel, and her expression softened imperceptibly. "But I never forgot this place. Never forgot the day someone stood silent when I needed a voice. Never forgot that the same person spent months afterward trying to become better." Daniel couldn't breathe. The moment was here, the one he'd been dreading and craving for 6 months. He stood. His legs felt weak but held. His voice came out quieter than he intended, but steady. "I should have spoken up that day. I watched you get humiliated, and I stayed quiet because I was scared. Scared of losing my job, of not being able to pay my father's medical bills. I chose financial security over defending you." The words tumbled out faster now, months of guilt finally finding exit. "I regret that choice every single day. I told myself I was helping by fixing things afterward, but that was just me trying to feel better about my own cowardice. You deserved someone to stand with you in that moment, and I failed you." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The room was absolutely silent. Jira's violet eyes held his, and something shifted in them. Not forgiveness, exactly. Something more complex. "Daniel Cole. When everyone else stayed silent, you were the only one who moved. Not perfectly. Not courageously enough. You bent when you should have stood firm." She paused, and the marks on her neck glowed softer. "But you didn't break. You didn't become one of them. After that moment, you chose to live differently. You became someone who protected others even when no one was watching. That transformation, that choice to be better, that's what I came to measure." She turned back to the assembly. "The difference between an oppressor and someone trapped in a system is what they do with their regret. Oppressors justify. Trapped people learn, change, grow." Her voice strengthened. "This facility contains both. People who use power to harm, and people who use whatever tiny power they have to help. The Empire's evaluation of Earth doesn't rest on your efficiency metrics or trade volumes. It rests on which kind of person you choose to elevate." She looked at Pike, then Grant, then back to the full room. "In the name of the Kethar Imperial Guardian Service, I make the following declarations. Earth maintains its associate status. Houston Terminal is designated a priority facility based on the ethical standards demonstrated by its base workforce, not its political or supervisory leadership. Pike's face went through several emotions rapidly. Further, any future instances of systematic harassment based on species, origin, or cultural difference will be treated as violations of Imperial Code and will jeopardize Earth's entire status. The Empire protects its people. All of them. She pulled a small data chip from her uniform. This contains recommendations for personnel review, specifically suggesting leadership positions for individuals who've demonstrated consistent ethical action, including recommendations that certain current supervisors undergo mandatory retraining or reassignment. Grant's career had just ended. Everyone knew it. Finally, Zira said, "I'm recommending that Hira-9's monitoring protocols be expanded and formalized. When machines see justice more clearly than people, perhaps we should listen to them." A ripple of nervous laughter quickly stifled. "The formal evaluation is complete," she concluded. "Individual interviews will be conducted over the next 2 days for documentation purposes. You're dismissed." People stood, confused and shaken. Pike tried to approach Zira but was intercepted by Imperial administrators. Grant sat alone, staring at nothing. Daniel remained standing, not sure what to do with himself. 6 months of guilt, 6 months of trying to be better, and she'd just publicly dissected all of it. But she'd also called him someone who chose to be better. He'd take that. He'd take whatever small redemption she was willing to offer. The conference hall emptied slowly. Workers filed out in clusters, whispering. Earth representatives looked shell-shocked. Imperial officials looked grimly satisfied. And at the center of it all, Zira stood alone in her Guardian's uniform, the marks on her neck pulsing steadily, bearing the weight of 2 worlds meeting in judgment. Daniel started to leave, then stopped, looked back. She was watching him. And for the first time since she'd revealed herself, she looked less like a Guardian and more like the person he remembered. Tired, hopeful, human in all the ways that mattered. He nodded once. She nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. The hours after the evaluation felt like waking from surgery. Everything familiar but slightly wrong. Perspective shifted by revelation. Daniel went through the motions of his shift on autopilot. Other workers kept giving him looks, some respectful, some uncertain, some resentful. He'd been publicly elevated by an Imperial Guardian. That made him either a hero or a traitor depending on who you asked. Grant didn't return to the floor. Word spread quickly that he'd been placed on administrative leave pending review. His replacement, a quiet woman named Torres who'd worked in logistics for years, took over with minimal ceremony. The warehouse felt different without him, lighter somehow. Pike held a press conference that afternoon, his tone carefully modulated between concession and defiance. The Guardian's evaluation confirms what I've been saying all along. Earth workers are the backbone of this operation. We need to ensure they're properly supported and recognized. The senator's ability to spin anything was almost impressive, but the recordings had been distributed. People had seen him manipulating footage. His credibility was wounded, maybe mortally. Earth would recover from this. Pike's political career was less certain. Daniel was finishing inventory logs when an Imperial administrator, a tall Keldari with iridescent skin, approached him. Maintenance Technician Cole. Guardian Vareth has requested you attend a follow-up interview. Conference Room 7, 20 minutes. His stomach flipped. Right. Of course. Official documentation. He nodded, trying to look calm. The 20 minutes crawled by. He washed the warehouse grime off his hands, changed into a clean work shirt, tried to figure out what he'd say. Everything felt inadequate. Conference Room 7 was smaller than the main hall, designed for intimate meetings rather than public proceedings. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, the kind of space meant to put people at ease. Zira was already there, standing by the window looking out at the launch platforms. She'd removed the formal cloak. Without it, she looked smaller, more approachable. Though the guardian mark still glowed softly against her skin, she turned when he entered. For a moment, neither spoke. "Close the door," she said quietly. He did. They stood 5 feet apart, and the distance felt enormous and insufficient at the same time. "This isn't actually an interview," she said. "The documentation is already complete. I just wanted to talk, away from cameras and protocols." Her accent was still there, softer now than he remembered, smoothed by training but not erased. "Okay." She gestured to the chairs. They sat, and suddenly it felt like the break room again, 2 people occupying space together, trying to figure out how to exist in each other's presence. "I didn't know you'd sent a report about me," Daniel started. "I didn't." Hera 9 initiated the recruitment evaluation. The AI systems monitor behavioral patterns across all Imperial facilities. They're looking for specific markers, like protecting people nobody else protects. Like that. Also resilience under injustice, ethical consistency, ability to maintain compassion in hostile environments. She smiled slightly. "Apparently we both scored well. So when they terminated your contract, they offered me a choice: return to my homeworld with a severance package, or accept evaluation for Guardian training." She looked down at her hands, where the marks traced patterns across her fingers. "I almost said no. I'd spent so long learning to be invisible. The idea of becoming someone visible, someone with power, it terrified me." "What changed your mind?" She met his eyes. "You did. That night in the warehouse, when you stayed late to fix my mistake. I watched you through the camera feeds. You didn't know I was watching. You were alone, tired, probably wanted to go home. But you stayed. You protected me. I didn't do enough. You did what you could, and that taught me something important. Power isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up when it's difficult, helping when it's inconvenient, choosing the harder right over the easier wrong." Daniel felt heat behind his eyes. "I spent 6 months hating myself for that day. I spent 6 months learning to transform that day into purpose." She leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, you think you failed me, but you also gave me the only kindness I'd experienced in months. Do you know what that meant? In a place where I was constantly made to feel worthless, someone treated my mistakes with gentleness." His throat was tight. "I should have defended you to Grant." "Probably. But you also weren't equipped for that confrontation. You had real constraints. Your father's medication wasn't a convenient excuse. It was a genuine crisis. Doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed. "But it makes it understandable. The Empire doesn't look for perfect people, Daniel. We look for people who understand their own failures and try to be better. People who can recognize injustice because they've felt the weight of not stopping it." She stood, walking back to the window. The launch platforms glowed in the afternoon light. "When I was training, they taught us about judgment, how to assess whether a world or facility deserves Imperial protection. The metrics aren't about efficiency or profit, they're about character. How do the people with power treat the people without it? And Earth passed? Houston passed, specifically this terminal, because of workers like you. People who do the right thing when no one's watching." She turned back to him. "The Empire is vast. We can't protect everyone, so we protect the places that show they'll protect each other." "What happens now?" "Now I file my report. Houston gets elevated status. Grant faces review. Pike's political manipulation goes into Imperial records." "And you?" She hesitated. "You get recognition you never wanted. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why it matters." She walked over and extended her hand. It felt formal and intimate at once. "Daniel Cole. On behalf of the Kethar Empire, thank you for your service. Unofficial, unpaid, unrecognized service that made all the difference." He took her hand. Her skin was warm, the marks pulsing gently under his fingers. "Jira, I'm glad you're not just gone. I'm glad you became this." She smiled, and it was the first time he'd seen genuine joy on her face. Being a guardian means I get to make sure nobody else has to learn to be invisible. I get to protect the people who protected me." They stood there, hands clasped, and Daniel felt something shift. 6 months of guilt didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else. Purpose, maybe, or hope. She released his hand gently. "I have 17 more interviews to conduct. Formal documentation requires thoroughness. But after that," she paused, then continued with deliberate casualness, "I have 4 days before I'm required to report back to Imperial headquarters. Guardians are technically off-duty during transition periods. Off-duty Guardians probably have strict protocols to follow." Probably. But off-duty Zira is just a person who spent 6 months eating nutrition paste and missing real food. Daniel felt himself smile. "There's a place about 10 minutes from here. Best burgers in Houston. Some say in all of Earth. Bold claim. I stand by it." Her violet eyes held his, warm and amused in something else. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. "If someone were to show me this place, purely for cultural documentation purposes, that would align with my evaluation duties. Purely professional, absolutely." She picked up her formal cloak but didn't put it on, just draped it over her arm. "Ready when you are, Technician Cole." The title sounded different coming from her. Not dismissive, almost affectionate. They walked toward the door together, and Daniel had the strange sensation of 2 timelines converging. The person he'd been 6 months ago, scared and guilty. The person he'd tried to become, better and braver. And now this moment, where past and future met in an uncertain present. The conference hall doors opened. The bright Houston afternoon spilled in. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel felt like maybe he'd done something right. Not perfect, not heroic, but right in the way that actually mattered. The way that meant something to someone who mattered back. The diner was called Maria's, a squat building that had survived 3 decades of Houston's transformation from oil town to spaceport. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, the smell of grilled onions and coffee so strong it was almost aggressive. Daniel held the door for Zira. She paused in the entrance, taking it in with an expression of delighted surprise. "This is very human. That's the idea. No, I mean it's wonderfully, messily, chaotically human. Look at all these competing patterns. The aesthetic shouldn't work at all. It definitely shouldn't. But somehow it does." The waitress, an older woman with gray hair and permanent smile lines, showed them to a corner booth. Her eyes lingered on Zira's guardian marks with curiosity but no fear. Zira seemed to relax slightly. "What's good here?" she asked when they had menus. "Everything. But the burger is legendary. Jalapeno cheese, grilled onions. This sauce they won't tell anyone the recipe for. That sounds aggressively flavored. Texas doesn't do subtle." She laughed, and the sound was so unexpected and genuine that Daniel felt it in his chest. He realized he'd never heard her laugh before, not in the warehouse, certainly not during the evaluation. This was new territory. "I'll trust your expertise," she said, closing her menu. They ordered. Coffee for him, something called sweet tea for her. When the waitress left, silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with everything unsaid. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel ventured. "Of course. Why did you come back here personally? You could have sent the evaluation report from anywhere, could have had someone else conduct the inspection." Zira traced a pattern on the table with one finger, her marks pulsing gently. "During training they taught us to separate personal history from professional duty. Stay objective. Don't let past experiences color current judgment." She looked up. "I couldn't do that here. Because of what happened. Partly, but also because I needed to close something. A cycle, I guess." She wrapped her hands around her tea glass. "For so long I existed in 2 states, victim and invisible. I thought those were my only options, either suffer or disappear completely. Coming back showed you something else. It showed me I could be neither, and both. I could acknowledge what happened without being defined by it. I could use power to protect instead of dominate. She smiled sadly. I needed to see Grant's face when he realized the person he humiliated had authority over him. Not for revenge, for proof that the universe isn't only cruel. And you needed to see me. Yes. Her violet eyes held his steadily. You represent something important to me. You're proof that people can choose differently. That one moment of weakness doesn't define a whole life. That growth is real. I spent 6 months thinking I'd ruined everything. You spent 6 months proving you hadn't. Daniel, do you know how many people I've encountered who made the same choice you did? Who stayed silent when speaking up was dangerous? She leaned forward. Most of them justified it, told themselves it was practical, necessary, the smart move. And then they kept making that same choice, over and over, until it became who they were. But you didn't, she interrupted gently. You made a choice you regretted, and then you spent months doing differently. That transformation, that refusal to let one failure become your identity, that's rare. That's what the Empire looks for. The food arrived, burgers that were almost comically large, fries that could feed a small family. Jira stared at her plate with something between awe and concern. This is a meal for 3 people. This is Houston portion sizes. You get used to it. She picked up the burger carefully, examining it from multiple angles, then took a bite. Her eyes widened. Oh, this is... She chewed thoughtfully. This shouldn't work. Too many flavors competing. But they're balanced, Daniel finished. Yeah, that's Maria's secret. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Daniel watched Zira experience the absurd joy of a good burger, and something in him settled. This person, who now carried Imperial authority and could alter the fate of worlds, was also just someone enjoying too much cheese and spicy peppers. After a while, Zira put down her burger and looked at him seriously. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone? Always. When they offered me Guardian training, part of me wanted to refuse, not because I didn't think I could do it, but because I was afraid of what I might become. Power has a way of transforming people. I'd seen it happen. People who started wanting to help and ended up wanting to control. You were afraid you'd become like Grant, or worse. At least Grant is petty. Some people who start with good intentions end up justifying terrible things in the name of order or progress. She looked down at her hands, at the marks glowing there. These marks represent authority. They open doors, command respect, give me the power to change lives. That's terrifying. But you did it anyway. I did it because of you. That night in the warehouse, watching you fix my mistakes alone. You had no authority, no power, no audience. You just did what was right because it was right. And I thought, if that's possible without power, maybe power can be wielded the same way. So I'm the reason you became a guardian. You're one of the reasons. The main reason was proving to myself that being hurt doesn't mean you have to hurt others, that you can transform pain into protection. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close. When I walked into that conference hall today wearing these marks, seeing your face, I was terrified. Terrified you'd hate me for leaving. Terrified you'd think I was showing off. Terrified that coming back would ruin whatever good memory you had of me. I thought you were going to hate me, Daniel admitted. For not speaking up? For being a coward when you needed someone. We both spent 6 months afraid of the same thing. She smiled. We're not very good at this, are we? At what? Trusting that people can forgive each other. Trusting that relationships don't have to be perfect to be real. Daniel turned his hand palm up on the table. An invitation. After a moment, Zira placed her hand in his. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady. The guardian marks on her fingers pulsed in sync with his heartbeat, or maybe he imagined that. What happens now? He asked. You file your report and disappear back into the Empire? I file my report and return to duties. But Guardians don't just disappear. We have territories, responsibilities. Earth is part of my jurisdiction now. Meaning, I'll be back. Regularly. Officially, and, she paused, meaningfully. Unofficially. Unofficial visits from an Imperial Guardian. That sounds complicated. It probably will be. I'll have duty schedules and protocols. You'll have your work here. There's a whole galaxy between us most of the time, but not all the time. No, not all the time. They sat there, hands clasped across a table sticky with burger grease, in a diner that had no business existing in an age of interstellar travel. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way, and somehow ended up here. "This is really good tea," Jira said suddenly. "Right? Like, surprisingly good. I expected it to be overly sweet, but there's depth to it. Sweet tea is sacred in this part of Earth. Take it seriously or don't take it at all. I'm learning so much about human culture. Just wait until you try the pie. Maria makes a pecan pie that's basically a religious experience. I have 4 days before I have to leave." She said it carefully, like testing the words. 4 days to experience Earth culture. Learn about human customs. Sample local cuisine. That's a lot of culture to cover in 4 days. I'm a dedicated professional. Clearly. Her smile was soft and real and directed entirely at him. Maybe I could use a local guide. Someone who knows the good places, who can explain why nothing matches, but it all works anyway. "I might know someone," Daniel said. "He's not exciting. Works maintenance, probably smells like machine oil most of the time, but he knows where the good food is. He sounds perfect." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and uncertainty and the beginning of something neither could name yet. Outside, Houston hummed with the usual chaos of a spaceport city. Ships launched and landed. Dozens of species moved through the streets. The galaxy turned on its massive axis, indifferent to the small stories happening in its margins. But in a corner booth at Maria's diner, two people who'd learned what it meant to be invisible were choosing to be visible to each other. And that felt like the start of something that might actually matter. 3 months later, Daniel was recalibrating a cargo scanner when the alert came through terminal-wide. Imperial Guardian arrival, docking bay 7. Standard diplomatic protocols in effect. He smiled and kept working. Around him, newer workers scrambled to look presentable. The ones who'd been there during the evaluation just glanced up and went back to their tasks. Guardian Vareth's visits had become routine, if routine could describe something that still made his heart beat faster. She came every few weeks, always officially. Inspection follow-ups, protocol reviews, worker welfare assessments. The paperwork was impeccable. But she also always found time for an hour at Maria's, or a walk through the park near the old space center, or just sitting in the break room talking about nothing important. They were figuring it out. Slowly, carefully, two people from different worlds learning how to exist in each other's orbit. Torres, who'd replaced Grant as supervisor, walked past Daniel's workstation. "Your Guardian friend is here. Conference room 3 in 20 minutes. "She's not my Guardian," Torres smirked. "Sure she's not." The terminal had changed in small ways since the evaluation. Hera 9's monitoring protocols had been expanded, giving the AI more authority to flag problematic behavior before it escalated. 3 supervisors had been reassigned after their own records got reviewed. New training programs emphasized cross-species cooperation, and workers knew they could report problems without fear of retaliation. The Empire was watching. More importantly, Zero was watching. Daniel finished the scanner calibration and headed to the conference room. He found Zira reviewing data displays, still in her formal Guardian uniform, marks glowing softly against her neck. She looked up when he entered and smiled. That smile still did things to his equilibrium. Maintenance Technician Cole. "Your terminal efficiency ratings have improved by 18% this quarter. I'll pass that along to the team." The improvements correlate directly with reduced harassment incidents and increased worker satisfaction. It's almost like treating people with dignity makes them more productive. Revolutionary concept. The Empire should publish a paper. She closed the displays and the professional mask slipped a bit, revealing the person underneath. "How's your father?" "Good day today. He's been asking about you. Wants to know when you're coming for dinner." Daniel's father had met Jira on her second visit back. He'd taken one look at her guardian marks and said, "So you're the reason my son finally stopped moping around." Jira had laughed until she'd cried. They'd been conspiring together ever since. "Tell him I'll try to make the next visit. Though Imperial nutrition paste is starting to grow on me, that's Stockholm Syndrome talking." "Possibly." She walked over to the window overlooking the docks. A sleek Imperial vessel sat in Bay 7, elegant and purposeful. "I'm being reassigned soon. Promoted, technically." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Frontier Coordination. I'll be overseeing Guardian operations across 6 sectors instead of 3. More responsibility, larger territory." She turned to face him. "It's what I trained for." "It's a good thing. But it means less frequent visits. Maybe once every 2 months instead of every few weeks." She said it matter-of-factly, but he could hear the tension underneath. He started, then stopped. What was the right response? He was happy for her. He was, but the thought of seeing her half as often felt like losing something he'd only just found. "It's fine," he said. "We'll figure it out. We always do." "Daniel." She walked over and took his hands. Her touch was familiar now, comfortable. "I spoke to the Imperial Development Office about Earth. About Houston specifically." "Okay. There's a training program. Technical specialists who want to work in cross-species facilities. It's competitive, but they're looking for people with practical experience and proven cultural competency." He understood before she finished. "You recommended me. I flagged your name. The decision would be entirely yours." She squeezed his hands gently. "The position would involve rotation. 6 months at various Imperial facilities, learning advanced systems and diplomatic protocols, then return assignments to home worlds as senior technical coordinators, meaning I'd be traveling to Imperial facilities, where certain Guardians have jurisdiction, where coordination meetings happen regularly, where coincidental schedule overlaps are entirely plausible. That's very convenient." "I thought so." Daniel looked at their joined hands, at the way her guardian mark seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. 6 months ago, he'd been terrified of losing his job. Now someone was offering him a chance to join the Empire's technical service, to see other worlds, to build something larger than daily survival, to stay connected to her. "I'd have to think about it. Talk to my dad. Make sure he's stable enough. Of course, there's no pressure." "But Daniel," she met his eyes, "you've spent years shrinking yourself to fit into small spaces. Maybe it's time to find out what happens when you let yourself expand." He thought about that, about the person he'd been, afraid to speak up, about the person he'd tried to become, helping in invisible ways, about the person he might be if he took this chance. "I'll apply," he said. "Can't promise I'll get in." "You'll get in." Her certainty was absolute. They're looking for exactly what you demonstrate. Ethics, competency, the ability to bridge cultures. No pressure, though. None at all. They stood there, hands clasped, and Daniel felt the future opening like a door. Uncertain, yes. Complicated, definitely. But also full of possibility. The alert chimed. Zara's time in the conference room was up, other appointments waiting. She released his hands reluctantly. "Dinner tonight?" she asked. "Maria's having a special. Something called chicken fried steak that I'm told defies all culinary logic. It's an abomination, and also delicious. I have to experience this." They walked out together through corridors that no longer felt oppressive. Workers nodded to them. some friendly, some still uncertain about the Guardian who'd upended their world. Jira nodded back, acknowledging each person as an individual worth seeing. In the main corridor they paused before splitting toward their respective duties. "Jira," Daniel said, "thank you for coming back. For making this," he gestured vaguely, "possible." She smiled, soft and real. "Thank you for being worth coming back to." They separated then, professional and proper. But Daniel could feel her presence even after she'd turned the corner, like gravity shifted slightly in her direction. That night at Maria's, they sat in their usual booth and talked about nothing important. The terrible quality of Imperial nutrition paste. The surprisingly good poetry that Keldari workers composed during long shifts, whether sweet tea counted as a dessert or a beverage. The waitress brought them pie without asking, because she'd learned their patterns. Jira insisted Daniel tell her about every variety Maria's offered, then ordered 3 different kinds because she couldn't decide. "This is excessive," she said, looking at the plates. "This is research. I'm conducting a very thorough cultural study. I can see that." She took a bite of pecan pie and her expression went blissful. "Okay, this is worth the sugar coma I'm going to have. Told you." They ate pie and talked about futures that were uncertain but not impossible, about his potential training program, about her new responsibilities, about the complicated logistics of caring for someone across galactic distances. But mostly, they just existed together, 2 people who'd found each other in trauma and chosen to build something better from it. Later, walking back to the transit station, Jira spoke quietly. "Do you ever think about that day? In the warehouse?" "Sometimes. Less now. It doesn't hurt the way it used to." "Same. For a long time, I could only remember the humiliation. But now I remember what came after. You, working late to protect me, choosing to be better." She looked up at the Houston sky, where ships traced lines between stars. That's the part that matters, not the falling, the getting back up. They reached the station. Her transport back to the Imperial vessel waited on one platform. His route home waited on another. 2 more months until I'm back," she said. "I'll be here. Probably covered in machine grease and complaining about the heat." She laughed. "I wouldn't want you any other way." She hesitated, then leaned up and kissed his cheek. It was brief, gentle, and somehow more intimate than anything that had come before. "See you soon, Daniel Cole. See you soon, Guardian Vareth." She walked toward her platform, the Guardian marks on her neck glowing softly in the evening light. Heads turned as she passed, people recognizing authority and power. But Daniel saw something else. He saw someone who transformed pain into purpose, someone who used power to protect instead of dominate, someone who believed that small gestures of kindness mattered more than grand demonstrations of force. And he saw someone who'd given him the chance to become better than he'd been. His transport arrived. As it pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of her, standing straight and certain, no longer the person who'd learned to make herself invisible, but also not someone who'd forgotten what that felt like. The city blurred past, Houston at night, a mess of old and new, Earth and Empire, human and alien all jumbled together in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow did, like everything else in his life lately. In his pocket, his datapad buzzed. A message from Hera 9. Technical Training Program application flagged for priority review. Your behavioral patterns continue to demonstrate optimal compatibility with Imperial cooperative standards. Additional recommendations submitted. He smiled. Even the machines were conspiring to push him forward. Across the terminal, the Imperial vessel prepared for departure. Inside, Jira would be filing reports, reviewing protocols, planning her next 6 weeks of Guardian duties across 3 sectors. But she'd also be thinking about pie, about terrible sweet tea, about a maintenance technician who'd somehow become the center of her gravity. The galaxy was vast and complicated, full of injustice and cruelty and systems designed to crush people into shapes they never chose. But it was also full of people who chose differently. People who protected others even when it cost them. People who turned shame into growth. People who used power to lift instead of press down. And sometimes, against all odds, those people found each other. Not in grand romantic gestures or epic declarations, but in a warehouse where someone stayed late to fix mistakes that weren't theirs. In a diner where two people shared pie and learned to exist in each other's presence. In the choice made over and over to be better than yesterday. That was the thing about humanity that the Empire had finally recognized. Not that humans were perfect, they weren't. But that the best of them understood failure, carried guilt, and chose to transform both into something that looked a lot like grace. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. In the end, this wasn't a story about empires, marks of power, or interstellar politics. It was about something far quieter and far more defiant. The way two ordinary beings refused to let their worst moments define the shape of their lives. Humanity is never the absence of failure. It's the stubborn choice to rise from it, even if you rise slowly, awkwardly, or with burger grease on your fingers. But now the question hangs over all of us like an Imperial audit. What part of yourself have you kept small because you thought the world wouldn't let you be bigger? Whose dignity did you witness being chipped away? And what stopped you from stepping forward? And perhaps most uncomfortable of all, what would your life look like if you finally chose to grow past the version of yourself that fear built? If you made it all the way here, write "visible" in the comments so I know you stayed until the final breath of this journey. Tell me your city. Earth is vast and I want to know where our constellations connect. And if this story moved something in you, or at least made you crave pie, subscribe, like, hype it up, share it with someone who still believes small acts matter, and jump into the next video in the card that just appeared on your screen. Humanity deserves company on the way forward.